Hello, I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. You're watching The Context on BBC News.
I would like to speak about yet another Russian attack in Donbass, in the town of Konstantinivka. We understand that they are killing civilians on purpose.
We don't yet know exactly what the nature of the projectile was, but certainly the images that have circulated subsequently of the damage done are pretty horrendous.
A few months ago in Helsinki, I spoke to how President Putin's war in Ukraine has been and will continue to be a strategic failure for Russia.
Welcome to the programme. In Ukraine, 17 people are killed in a busy market. This as the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visits the country. Also on the programme, we'll be heading to Brazil, where the rates of deforestation have fallen significantly again. To discuss that and all our other stories, I'll be joined by the panel. Rebecca Harding, independent trade economist, and Kelly Hyman, legal analyst and democratic strategist. Right, we're going to start in Ukraine. As I said, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is there, has been visiting, has made significant announcements, more financial commitments to Ukraine. We'll come to that in just a moment. First, though, this incident, 17 people killed. Footage has been posted by the Ukrainian government of this alleged attack. And just a warning, it is distressing. Now, the date of that video suggests it was actually filmed today. Konstantinivka is the city involved. It's near the front line. It's near Bakhmut. We have these pictures of the aftermath. 34 people wounded, we know at least. Now, we don't exactly know the details of the attack, of this potential strike. It may be a missile or artillery shell. Those details as yet unconfirmed. Now, as I mentioned, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ukraine at the same time. He's in Kyiv, the capital, and he has been pledging continued US support, military and economic support to Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
That includes $665.5 million in new military and civilian security assistance. In total, we committed over $43 billion in security assistance since the beginning of the Russian aggression. Now, since I was last here almost exactly 1 year ago, Ukrainian forces have taken back more than 50% of the territory seized by Russian forces since February of 2022. In the ongoing counteroffensive, progress has accelerated in the past few weeks. This new assistance will help sustain it and build further momentum.
Well, I spoke to Maria Zolkina, research fellow at London School of Economics and the head of regional security and conflict studies at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, a think tank.
The first issue is that the real assessment and adjustment of bilateral assessment of the ongoing counteroffensive, because publicly no one has criticized Ukraine so far, but we know that there are a lot of signals from experts and sometimes politicians that the tempos are a bit slow or the results are not as sufficient as someone in the West has expected. So that's why, in order to have a conversation about that on the top level of authorities, it was needed for someone from Washington to come for an open conversation to Ukrainian president and with Ukrainian government and Minister of Defense in particular. And the second issue that we know that at the Vilnius summit, US was reluctant about giving Ukraine very open, very clear signal about the invitation to NATO membership. And it made a lot of Ukrainian experts and politicians be concerned about what was the motivation of US. And there was actually fear, some kind of fear that NATO membership of Ukraine might be somehow used in order to restart at some point, maybe not now, but later, negotiations with Russia. And I think both of the topics are important to have a conversation behind the closed doors in a private,
Right, let's bring in our panel for the first time. Rebecca Harding, independent trade economist, and Kelly Hyman, legal analyst and democratic strategist. Thanks both for being our panel. Right, lots to pick through this visit by US Secretary of State. Kelly, let's come to you first. What do you make of the significance of the announcements of the continuing commitment here?
I think it shows a strong support by US. A recent poll that was done says that a majority of Americans do believe that the war that's going on in Ukraine that could have significant effects for US security. Now, in regards to the funding of it, people are split, according to this poll, based on political lines, where a majority of Democrats do support more funding, where, according to this poll, a majority of Republicans do not support the funding. But by the U.S. Secretary being there is a key to show that the U.S. is in line and will walk step by step with Ukraine.
Well, let's just zone in on what you just said about the Republicans there. Pending the, obviously, outcome of the election, is there a potential then for a shift in U.S. policy?
Well, if there is a new president, there could potentially be, depending on what happens with the election. But we'll have to see how that plays out in 2024. Most likely, as it stands right now, that Trump will be the nominee for the Republican Party and Biden will be the nominee for the Democratic Party.
OK, Rebecca, let's come to you with your economics hat on, as always. Some of the money here, some of the sums of money. Interesting. Antony Blinken talking about, of course, continued military support and training and hardware and some big numbers there, but also talking about financial support for Ukraine itself, things like rebuilding and things away from the direct military support. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I know you're saying words of wisdom. We can see you, but we can't hear you.
Saying was that
there we go. Yeah.
What I was saying was that the World Bank estimates that this costs $411 billion to rebuild Ukraine. So the cost for the whole world has been 1.6 trillion, and there is no off ramp for either side at the moment. So we have to think very, very seriously in terms of the economics of all of this. The damage to the infrastructure across Ukraine is absolutely huge, and one of the things that has to happen is we have to start thinking about, for example, how to get grain out of Ukraine using different ports. So that's creating a whole new road and rail and port infrastructure, because the ports in the south and Odessa and so on can't be used because of Russian occupation at the moment. So this is going to be a massive exercise, and it's going to involve the whole world, and it's going to involve the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development and the IMF and the European Union as well. So the US is taking a lead on this, and that's very significant.
Rebecca, Kelly, thank you both for that. We will be back with you in just a moment. I want to look at another element of the war in Ukraine. Ever since it started, the focus on high-tech warfare, so drones using artificial intelligence. And we've seen plenty of advances in the drone technology and how they're used. Earlier, I spoke to Dr. James Rogers, Senior Fellow at Cornell Tech Policy Institute. He told me how high tech is being used in the war in Ukraine.
Sadly, the war in Ukraine has become a testbed for deploying these high-tech systems in conflict, but they have become vital. As you heard in that last report, there is this fusion of artificial intelligence into drone systems. So drones are the hardware, AI is the software, and you send these drones up into the air with their computer brains on board, with their AI vision, and they're pre-programmed to pick out specific targets. And so what happens then is this information is relayed back to the targeteers, to those who are controlling these drones. They're processed through AI as well to pick out important points of intelligence. And it's from that you pick the targets through which you direct your artillery, or you direct the drones that are armed with small mortars, rockets, bombs, improvised devices. In essence, it's that detection through the AI of the drone that makes the precision of the strike happen.
It's a remarkable thing to step back and look at. We know, don't we, that it's often the case that in times of war we get these innovations and these leaps forward. And the area of drones and using artificial intelligence to pick out potential targets is being used more and more. Rebecca, what have you made of that kind of step change?
So, I mean, on one level, as we've seen with the headlines today, this is an attritional conflict. It looks like conventional warfare, but what's been really fascinating about this from a military perspective is just how drones have been used in this combat. So right from the word go, even civilian drones have been used. So even non-military players of games on drones have been using drones for surveillance, but also as well for actually launching weapons. So it's a much broader concept of warfare. It changes the game completely. It changes its characteristics. And now we're seeing that combined with cyber to disrupt, to detect, displace. It's actually a very different type of warfare that's going on here. So it's very interesting from that perspective.
And Kelly, artificial intelligence, it's touching every area of life at the moment, and the war in Ukraine no different.
No, absolutely. And in the US, there are some concerns about AI in regards to the effect of it from a legal standpoint, not in the sense of war, but actually using it to replicate someone's voice or doing pretend interviews where someone is as well. But in regards to the war situation, absolutely, as we advance in technology, we're definitely going to see changes, and using the drones potentially could save lives rather than have people out there fighting it, that the drones can go over ahead and check things out.
Yeah, well, let's pick up on one of the ethical points that you just mentioned there, because one of the considerations, one of the concerns, is that the advancement in AI means that you can send up a drone, AI in the camera, it can pick out targets. At the moment, it tends to be still a human being making the decision. But effectively, you could have a situation where the human decision making is locked out of the loop. The drone goes up, AI identifies a target and decides to strike, decides on its own what to hit and what not to hit. And suddenly you're in a whole new era of warfare. And there are calls, Rebecca, for things like legislation and established rules of war. But of course, it's very difficult to implement those in a conflict.
Absolutely. And let me take you back to these civilian drones that were being used from a Chinese company at the start of the conflict. These are civilians who were using gaming drones. So they were commercial drones, and they were being used by the Russians and the Ukrainians to detect what was going on for surveillance and everything. Now, they actually had a capability in them to detect where they were in the world, so which region they were fighting in. And so actually then, because it was based on Chinese technology, there was a scope for the Chinese then to come in and say, well, we're not going to let those bombs go off over these particular regions. So actually to interfere with state actors and non-state actors. So the way in which this is changing warfare is just to broaden its whole concept, because it's about governments, state actors, it's about industry, and it's also about civil society as well.
Rebecca, Kelly, thanks both. We'll be back with you in a moment. Now, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Right, let's look at some of the stories making the news now. Here in the UK, parts of the country hit 32 degrees Celsius in an unseasonal heat wave. It's sweeping across the country. Usually September marks the start of autumn and cooler weather, but forecasters say the mercury could hit levels higher than the middle of summer. Heat health alerts have been upgraded to amber for most of England. Former advisor to Birmingham City Council has said the hosting of the Commonwealth Games was a mistake, given its legacy of financial problems. Max Corliss said last summer's event had been a challenge too far for the council. Urgent talks are taking place following Tuesday's announcement of the Labour-run council is effectively bankrupt. The 52 Wilko shops due to close next week because of the chain's collapse have been named. Administrators PwC said 24 shops would close next Tuesday, with a further 28 to shut down a week tomorrow. More than 1,000 staff are being made redundant. Right, you are live with BBC News. We're going to head over to the US now and to the US state of Georgia. The judge there has held his first hearing in the case against Donald Trump and others over charges relating to conspiracy to overturn the state's 2020 election results. Now the hearing is being broadcast live, marking it apart from other Trump criminal cases. Let's bring in the panel straight away. Kelly, we're going to come to you first. Talk us, just first of all, just remind us of this case in Georgia and the significance of it.
Sure. So it's a state court case in Georgia, and Trump has been indicted. So what that means is in U.S., when you're indicted, that based on the facts and evidence, a jury believes that you should be charged with serious crimes. So he has been charged along with 19 other co-conspirators. What is different in this indictment from other cases in the U.S. is the fact that not only are there co-conspirators, because there are other as well, but these are lawyers and they've been charged with co-conspirators in the case. So right now the judge has 2 cases that are going to trial in October. And as far as we can see, that case is going to be televised.
Right. And the significance of it amongst all the different cases that Donald Trump is facing?
This one is different from the legal standpoint because of the fact that not only are there co-conspirators, but there's RICO charges. So those usually in the US, the RICO charges are for criminals. It's people that they say in the US, someone in a mob. And so he's been charged with that, of the co-conspiracy, but also under the RICO. The fact that not only did they co-conspire together, but in the US, they did some type of overt act, as it's called, something to further that conspiracy. And that Trump, along with his lawyers and some other people, co-conspired to overturn the election.
Rebecca, let's zoom out a little bit from this specific case, because Kelly's done a brilliant job of just talking us through exactly why it's significant and why it's different. What do you make of the whole the array of criminal cases involving Donald Trump?
So I think it's almost the essence of the legacy of the Trump era. So what Trump did during the whole time, you've got Navarro on trial at the moment as well. He's the guy that wrote Death by China and sort of underpinned the whole of the sort of conflict with China, the trade wars with China and Trump's economic approach. It was all about undermining institutions of the state. It was all about questioning their legitimacy of institutions. And what you're seeing now is almost the institutions coming back of United States democracy, coming back and actually saying to Donald Trump, come on, you're not above the law. And this is really a test case. From looking at it from outside, it's a test case of whether or not the US Constitution and US institutions are strong enough to withstand this sort of battering that it's getting from all of these different cases.
Rebecca, Kelly, thank you so much for that. And of course, Donald Trump denies the charges in all 4 of those cases. Next, we're going to go to Brazil. Some of the worst flooding ever seen in southern Brazil has killed at least 31 people. Rescuers trying to reach families stranded on rooftops by rising waters. The governor of Rio Grande do Sul said it was the state's worst weather disaster. Storm forced hundreds of people from their homes. Brazilian president says the federal government is ready to help. Here's our South America correspondent, Katie Watson.
The governor of Rio Grande do Sul says this has been the worst ever weather disaster. The small town of Mucum was one of the focal points of the flooding. 85% of the town was flooded, and there's fears that the death toll could rise. Now, this isn't the first major flooding in Brazil this year. Back in February, around 50 people died here in the state of Sao Paulo because of extreme rain and landslides. Now, experts are saying that the El Nino weather phenomenon has made things much worse. That's when the eastern Pacific, the waters in the eastern Pacific near the coast of Peru and Ecuador, the waters there warm more than usual, causing much more extreme weather events. And those weather events are often manifested here. Much heavier rainfall. Now in Rio Grande do Sul, which is in the south of Brazil, it's close to the border with Uruguay and Argentina. That often sees quite a lot of extreme weather events. It's an area of Brazil that rains consistently throughout the year. And President Lula da Silva has said the federal government is on standby to support the region as more bad weather is expected in the coming days.
Thanks to Katie for that update. Well, we're going to stay in Brazil, actually, because satellite pictures show that the rate of deforestation in the Amazon is continuing to fall. It dropped by 2/3 in August compared with the same period last year. Rainforest is a crucial buffer, of course, in the fight against climate change. And since he took power at the start of the year, President Lula da Silva has promised to crack down on environmental crime and aim for zero deforestation by 2030. Well, let's speak to Annie Alencar, Science Director of the Amazon Environmental Research Institute. Thank you so much for coming on the programme.
Thank you for having me, Luis.
So how significant is this fall in the rate of deforestation?
For sure, this is a very significant fall. You know, I mean, we were, in the past 4 years, we just saw like deforestation going up and up. And having almost 50% deforestation decrease up to August is amazing. I mean, I think it's a win for sure.
And is it sustainable? Are you confident that the goals, the pretty ambitious goals set out, can be met now?
The goals are really pretty ambitious. I think we are on the path, but there are still a lot of things to do. I mean, at least the majority of deforestation that has been put out are related to illegal deforestation outside in public lands. Now we have another challenge, which is also related to deforestation inside private properties, which need other type of incentives that are not exactly only enforcement.
Okay, and give us a scale quickly of I suppose the damage already done. Clearly, the rate of deforestation coming down is a good thing from the environmental standpoint. Just remind us of the scale of the damage already done there.
Yeah, before the last president, Bolsonaro president, we were below 10,000 square kilometers a year. And in the past 4 years, we were above that. And this was not seen since the 2000s. So it was really worrisome because the rates was keeping increasing. So right now we have this major trend of reduction, which is very significant. And I think the next official deforestation rate is going to be below 10,000 square kilometers.
Okay. Annie, stay there for us if you were. Just going to bring in the panel, Kelly and Rebecca. Rebecca, let's come to you. What do you make of this successful attempts thus far to reduce deforestation?
So, I mean, it's got to be seen as absolutely fantastic news. The more of this happens, the more obviously we're beginning to make a dent or beginning to make a positive contribution towards addressing climate issues. And obviously, Brazil is being very badly hit by all of that. It doesn't mean it's stopped. We still have deforestation, but what's really encouraging about all of this is the political angle that's being given to it, because the current government is actually aiming to stop deforestation completely by 2030, and that really is a welcome reversal from what was going on in the Bolsonaro era. And about 120 million in technical assistance is being given, not just for deforestation, but to incentivize the transfer of land to indigenous people and encourage them to use their land in a more sustainable way. So there are some very positive things that are happening here.
And Kelly, let's come to you, because what does happen here, of course, impacts everyone right around the world.
Absolutely. We are all in this together. Climate change is real. Unfortunately, there are some people in the US, predominantly the Republican Party, that do not believe in climate change. As we can see, when they had the Republican debate, someone from the Republican Party took the stand and said climate change is a hoax, where a majority of the Democrats do support and believe in climate change. And we can see that apparent by President Biden being in office in regards to signing up to the Paris Accord. And so that is key. Climate is key. So that's why one of the things why in the US, the 2024 election is so important, because hopefully we can move forward and all work on this together rather than the US being isolated and calling climate change a hoax.
Okay, Kelly, Rebecca, Annie, thank you very much for coming on the programme and talking us through that issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, just want to remind you of our developing news over the last couple of hours, and that is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He has been in Ukraine, he's been visiting Kyiv, and just in the last couple of hours we've heard a little bit more detail from him on why he's there, and that is to pledge further support to Ukraine, a further $1 billion in support, of course, largely military support, but also economic support away from military matters as well. We will pick through the details of that a little later. Stay with us. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News.
Hello. Storm Daniel in the central Mediterranean has brought some catastrophic flooding across parts of central and eastern Greece. You can see that storm system, that area of low pressure here, should be gradually easing, I think, over the next 24 hours or so, but still further rain to come for areas that could really do without it across eastern Greece, for instance, Skiathos towards Volos as well. Meanwhile, for much of Europe, we've got high pressure keeping things warm and dry. A lot of dry weather across parts of Turkey after the recent heavy showers we've had. Here's the remnants of Storm Daniel perhaps pepping up further as they move into those warm waters of the central Mediterranean. For much of Spain and Portugal, the weather looking largely dry. We've got a few showers in the north here. Hot and dry for France, certainly temperatures in the high 30s in places, and that heat extending across Germany, the Low Countries into Scandinavia. We've just got some heavy showers and windier conditions around the northwest of Norway at the moment. But we are keeping a close eye on the weather in the Mediterranean as Storm Daniel could intensify, potentially moving close to Crete, for instance, towards the end of the week. But thankfully, for much of Greece, things should look a little bit drier. So for much of Central and Eastern Europe, the weather looking hot and dry, just turning a little bit cooler and more unsettled, I think, for London and Paris as we head through into next week. But temperatures on the rise further east too, and the weather eventually drying out in Athens. Bye-bye.
Now showing on BBC Real.
Lost in the Brazilian Atlantic forest, off the beaten track lies the small village of Paranapiacaba.
Meados do século XIX, o café se tornou a principal produto de exportação do Brasil. Antes, o transporte era feito por mulas. Por isso, uma das opções da época foi investir no transporte ferroviário.
At the end of the 1850s, the London-based engineering office of James Brunlees was contracted to carry out the studies for the construction of the railway.
Ele trouxe uma ideia que era uma tecnologia inovadora na época, o sistema funicular.
Nós estamos a 796 metros acima do nível do mar. Nenhum trem conseguiria subir ou descer sem o auxílio de uma tecnologia ferroviária que segurasse esses trens.
Watch more stories like this at bbc.com/real.
Free speech is meaningless unless you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like.
To me, human rights means there's security, right to food, right to vote, right to live.
I'm a simple guy. When I do something and I like it, I want to do it more. Exactly for the Premier League, I would love to do it again.
I never thought I was going to be a famous movie person, but I always knew I was going to be a character actor.
Сказав моїй дружині, треба збиратись, треба піднімати дітей. Почалась війна.
When big names talk, they talk to the BBC.
When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on BBC Weather. On BBC News.
Hello, I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. You're watching The Context on BBC News. The video gaming industry shows strong sign of post-pandemic recovery with new blockbuster releases. I'll bring you some breaking news from here in the UK. It's about the man who escaped from prison. He was being held there awaiting trial. This is the man, 21 years old. He was awaiting trial on potential terror charges. Daniel Khalife is his name, 21 years old, former soldier. The update is that the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has ordered an investigation into how he managed to escape from Wandsworth prison. It's believed the former soldier got out by clinging to the underside of a food delivery van while dressed as a chef. He thought to have been working in the prison kitchens at the time. So it raises a good few questions, of course. Some of the questions being considered, though, why he was being held at a Category B prison rather than a high security Category A prison. That's certainly one of the questions that will be investigated. And also whether normal protocols were being followed at the time of the escape, and if not, why not? So that search is still underway. They have not found him and not returned him as far as we know. But the latest news there is the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, has ordered an investigation into how Daniel Khalife there managed to escape from prison. Right, we're going to take a look at the world of gaming now. Fewer video games were created after the pandemic, but that all changed this year. Blockbuster releases like Hogwarts Legacy, The Legend of Zelda, and Final Fantasy XVI show the industry is bouncing back. Another big release hits the shelves today. Here's our gaming correspondent, Stefan Powell.
Starfield. A sprawling space epic. It's the big hope for Xbox in 2023.
You're part of Constellation now.
Exclusive to that console, bosses hope it will be popular enough to help them claw back the gap on the Sony PlayStation 5, which is outselling the competition.
It's not just how the ship looks.
It's the brainchild of Todd Howard, game director of some of the most critically acclaimed titles of recent history, Skyrim and Fallout.
Was the game in your head as ambitious as the game has ended up becoming?
I always start with a tone. Okay, we're going to go out in space. You have a ship, you can land on planets, and it has this kind of science fiction vibe. You know, it wasn't until later, after we finished Fallout 4, we really start designing, where you realize how much you have to design. How much
space is big.
How much space is in space. It ended up just, you know, so much larger than anything we had ever done, and there were periods where you're, are we in over our heads?
What do you say to those people that might argue that games have got too big?
We found two things. One, they do play it for a really, really long time. But even if they play it, say, for 10 hours or 20 hours, and they finish the main quest and they save the world, whatever, that they see all the other choices. That experience, those 20 hours were different because they had so much choice.
Some critics have been impressed by this scope and grandeur. Others have found it a little underwhelming and disjointed.
We are not stopping.
As an exclusive release, it's only available to Xbox and PC players.
Change humanity.
Talking about audiences and who plays your game, do you think there is still a place in the industry for
exclusive games like this?
When you're making something, the more you can focus, the more you know this is the hardware or the thing people are going to play on. You know, your ability to focus on that always yields a better product.
I love this part.
Having spent £5.5 billion in 2020 on buying the studio that made the game, Microsoft is waiting to see if Starfield can blast away at PlayStation's lead.
This is where we belong.
Stefan Powell, BBC News.
Let's go live now to Los Angeles. Taylor Lorenz, our columnist at The Washington Post, covering technology and online culture. Thank you very much for coming on the programme.
Thanks for having me.
So there's certainly a lot of hype about this game. Is it ever going to live up to that?
You know, it might. It's already getting a lot of attention. It's certainly one of the major titles being released this year. But, you know, we'll see. We'll see how many people actually engage with it and spend a lot of time playing it.
And why do you think this is a big deal for the makers?
Well, as you guys just mentioned, they spent quite a lot of money acquiring it. And also this is Xbox's big, you know, moment. They're trying to really, you know, grow audience share, compete with Sony. And then, of course, the online sort of controversy surrounding it, too, I think has just added to kind of the excitement and discussion of it.
And is this, you know, is this potentially this kind of growing acceptance, I suppose, in more mainstream culture about the world of gaming? Because it's hugely popular, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, people forget that gaming is actually the #1 form of entertainment. It's hugely popular. It's a massive industry, although I think we pay a lot more attention to TV, movies, social media. You know, gaming is bigger than all of that. It's how a lot of people spend their time. And I think as we look at gaming, we're seeing increasingly these kind of breakout hits that really cross over into culture. Something like Last of Us is actually a similar game, right? It ended up being a hit HBO show, actually, that they adapted from the game. It used to be kind of the other way around. So I think gaming is just increasingly playing a bigger role in pop culture.
And is the industry based on, you need these absolute massive smash hits, and they make enough money to make up for the fact that the other games you produce may not kind of catch the imagination and may not do as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a gaming, again, it's a form of entertainment. I think all entertainment businesses kind of operate somewhat sometimes on this business model where you can have these breakout hits that can just out earn everything. Of course, there are smaller game publishers that just do publish the smaller games. But when you're talking about an Xbox or Sony or, you know, any of these other big companies, they are looking for the hit, right? This game took a lot to develop. It's a really expansive game. You know, it's robust. The graphics are incredible. So much work went into this game. So I think they are hoping that it sort of packs a punch.
Stay right there. We're going to come back to you, but I just want to bring in the panel. As you can see, Kelly and Rebecca are with me. Rebecca, you always have numbers and stats and figures. I'm hoping it's no different this time. What's your take on the gaming industry?
Okay, so I hope I won't disappoint. So the costs of this explain why so much is being spent, why Microsoft has spent so much on acquiring the company in the first place, and why they are really hopeful of revenues being high. If you look at the costs that the game took to develop, so Starfield took to develop, they started off with a budget of 200 million. It crept upwards and upwards to 400 million. They used 500 developers, and it took between 7 and 9 years to develop. So these are massive undertakings. So the economics of this actually only works if, number one, don't try it at home, because it isn't that easy building a game. And number two, it then means that you can only make money out of this if you have huge spending power, and you're able to get huge revenues from it. But just one little number that I discovered as I was doing some research for all of this, they've got to sell 20 million copies at launch in order to be able to hit their financial targets and get to 1 billion, which is what they're hoping for out of all of this. So there's a hope that it'll engage people in Xbox more, hope that it'll compete with PlayStation, but the risks, the financial risks, are very high.
Rebecca, you never disappoint. You're always on point. Thank you very much for that. Kelly, let's come to you. Are you a gamer? And what do you make of this mismatch between, I suppose, culturally, the huge engagement and yet the lack of attention it gets?
Well, you're talking about whether I'm a gamer, all right, so this is a lot different than when I was playing Madden football as a kid, and the graphics are much, much different. I was looking at the graphics and just taking my breath away in watching it from that standpoint of doing it. But I bring up to the point that, a lot of people do this. It's a way of entertainment and doing that. We're going to have to see how this one plays out and whether it's an economically beneficial or if it's a bust. But the graphics look pretty amazing. And as we move along with technology, these things are getting even realer and realer. And maybe at some point will just be so real that you're actually there as well.
Indeed. Kelly, Rebecca, thank you. Just one last question with Taylor. Do they release all these figures? As in, will we in however long, 6 months' time or whatever, be able to look back and judge, is this investment in this game, has it paid off, and will it have been worth it?
Well, we'll certainly know, some sales figures from retailers and stuff. But I think if this game flops for Microsoft, they have an interest like any company in not necessarily, making that very public. I think they want to position this game as a success. They're talking about it already as a success, even though it's just, launching. So, but we'll see, we'll see if the retailers are actually, what they're able to sell and what sort of information we're able to gather.
We will revisit it as and when we get any of that kind of detail. Taylor, Rebecca, Kelly, thank you all very much for that. Right, going to return to our developing news over the last few hours. Of course, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Ukraine, in the capital, Kyiv. He's been there for a while, but we've heard just in the last couple of hours or so some of the details of the commitments that he has promised to Ukraine. Another $1 billion effectively in support, largely military, obviously, but also reconstruction and civilian non-military support as well. Now, interestingly, when we cover these visits, Antony Blinken, this isn't his first time. He has been several times to Ukraine. It is interesting to look at how top officials travel to Kyiv. Just to say, Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. There's no civilian flights there. Airspace is closed. So politicians, even the most high-ranking ones, have to follow the same route as thousands of Ukrainians do when they return home from abroad. Here's one of the routes. A train from the Polish city of Rzeszów, close to the Ukrainian border, and then the 700-kilometre trip by rail. This is exactly how Blinken was travelling, as you can see here in this photo. In fact, Ukraine has now a small park of carriages re-equipped specifically for transporting VIP visitors. One of those first passengers on this route was former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Here we can see him, as you can see, posing for a photo there, thumbs up with a Ukrainian rail staff on board the train. That was back in April 2022, less than 2 months after the Russian invasion. And here already 3 European leaders travelling to Kyiv in one carriage. French President Emmanuel Macron there, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and at the time, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi. Remarkable photo that was June 2022. And here's the American Joe Biden there walking down that corridor. Or here we can see him in a cabin with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan opposite him there as he goes over the speech marking the 1-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine in February 2023. Let's bring our panel back. Rebecca Harding, independent trade economist, and Kelly Hyman there, a legal analyst and democratic strategist. Kelly, it's lovely, fascinating, extraordinary in a way to see those pictures roll through and get that insight. These really are moments of history.
Absolutely. And it's just so great to see a united front where we have the U.S. being there, the French, Germany, they're going to Ukraine and support for them. I think that's key, that we come together, that we as a nation unite and support others. I think that's key, and it's wonderful to see those photos.
And Rebecca, I don't know about you, but I was nervous just seeing the photo of those 3 world leaders in the same carriage, on the same train, effectively heading into a war zone. The security considerations, I don't even want to think about.
I think the security considerations throughout this whole process have been very, very tight indeed. I mean, we were talking about cyber warfare earlier, we were talking about hybrid conflict, and obviously putting top officials like that on a train is a very risky business, but it's the reality of where we are. And I think the most important thing, as Kelly says, is the fact that, you know, across Europe, it's completely changed expectations on and our understanding of the whole post-war era. It is really significant that NATO has pulled together so closely, that the European Union, the UK, other allies, the United States have all pulled together around all of this, and that the security has been there to enable them to do that. It's fantastic.
Indeed. Rebecca, Kelly, thank you as ever. Back with you in a moment. First, though, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Now showing on BBC Real.
The father of the atom bomb, J. Robert Oppenheimer, was instrumental in leading the Manhattan Project and creating the first ever nuclear bomb, the atom bomb. But he famously opposed developing the hydrogen bomb. So what's the difference? H bombs are thousands of times more powerful than atomic bombs.
In an atom bomb, they take big atoms that are somewhat unstable and split them, and that releases energy.
Hydrogen bombs, on the other hand, are a combination of nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. Instead of a single atom splitting, atoms fuse two lighter atomic nuclei together into a heavier one. It's the same reaction that powers our sun, and it's the fusion process that releases an even greater amount of energy than nuclear fission alone, hence the far greater explosive power.
Original global stories from the BBC.
You're live with BBC News now. It's time for the panel. This is the part of the show where our panel get to talk about whatever they want to talk about within reason. Kelly, let's start with you.
Well, being in the U.S., one of the key things is the Jonas Brothers getting divorced. As some of you know, that he is married to the Game of Thrones actress. And so in the US, which is different from the UK, we have prenups. And so what prenups are from a legal standpoint is when someone gets married, they sign a legal document, a prenup that basically memorializes what if something happens, if they get divorced, what's going to happen with their assets. And it could also talk about what happens with their kids. So Jonas is asking for the prenup to be enforced. And he's also asking for joint custody of their young, beautiful children.
I thought you were going down the celebrity angle, and of course you had to find the legal angle in that story. No surprise to that at all. Thank you for that. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Well, so I was struck by a story that was in the news today from Australia, which was about a koala bear called Claude. Now, it seems that there was a nursery in New South Wales that was growing eucalyptus saplings, and their saplings were disappearing. And this is going on for months, and they looked at everything. They looked at the poo that the animal was leaving behind. It wasn't wombat because they're square. Left a possum trap, absolutely nothing. And then one morning, the owner walked into the nursery to find an absolutely stoned koala full of eucalyptus, so full of eucalyptus it couldn't move, sitting on a pole. It had eaten so much eucalyptus that it was absolutely incapable of moving. And so he took him back into the bush, and a couple of days later he came back. Of course, there's a really serious side to this because koalas are endangered. I mean, it's a lovely story. It's really eye-catching, but koalas could actually be extinct by 2050 if there isn't urgent action. So what this nursery was actually doing was to try and plant saplings in order to get over drought, disease, and also deforestation, the devastation caused by fires. So actually, the koala was in a way eating its own solution. But I mean, the serious point is that something has to be done because eucalyptus trees are disappearing, and this is a sort of heartwarming story that just brings how much climate change, how much drought and devastation is having the impact on the koala.
Yeah, good. Of all the facts and figures that you've brought to us over the last hour, it would have taken a long time for me to guess that you would end on stoned koala bears, but I'm very, very pleased that you did. Thank you so much to our brilliant panel, Rebecca Harding, their independent trade economist, and Kelly Hyman, legal analyst and democratic strategist. Thank you both so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Right, just before I go, I do want to remind you with our developing story out of Ukraine over the last couple of hours or so. You may have seen over the last couple of days, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visiting the capital, Kyiv. And just in the last couple of hours, we got our first substantial words from him, basically outlining the continued support and fresh support too as well. Here he is meeting his Ukrainian counterpart. And after these pictures, we heard from him himself. What were the kind of commitments he made? Well, a fresh commitment of $1 billion. And he went into a little bit of detail about breaking that down. Of course, the vast majority of it military support, but also, interestingly, civilian support, rebuilding support, support for law and order, various other things. And one sentence that stuck out that he did say, he said, progress has accelerated in the past few weeks, referring to the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Of course, that counteroffensive has been going on for quite some time. It has been slow going, by the admission of all on all sides, really. But in terms of the US Secretary of State's comments saying that progress has accelerated in the past few weeks. Right, plenty more online as always. If you are online, get me there too. I'm on social media at L Vaughan Jones. I'm Lewis Vaughan Jones, and this is BBC News. Bye-bye.